thank you for joining me in this conversation about the future of our city and our region. It's great to see so many leaders and policymakers and people that have traveled from all over Florida and really all over the United States to be here today. There's been some recent news about the potential challenges of climate change and how the issues it may pose for our nation and our region and especially our city. The recent National Climate Assessment makes it clear that the Southeast, and particularly Florida, may face higher temperatures, increased storm intensity, sea level rise, and other threats that will challenge our economy and our way of life. And I want to make sure that we understand that these challenges are actually opportunities. Opportunities for us to create economic growth and an even better quality of life here in Orlando. And today what I want to do is I want to continue our conversations about how our community, how Orlando can be a leader in climate action and energy. In Orlando, we've come a pretty good ways with our Greenworks Orlando plan, and we have taken the support of our city council to demonstrate that our economy and our quality of life can certainly be affected by that. I want to thank our city council for their support. They're represented here today by Commissioner Stewart. Commissioner Stewart, why don't you stand up and get a little love there? So first and foremost, we set a target to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from our municipal operations by 15% between 2010 and 2017, and I'm proud to say that we have already surpassed that goal, so check that box. We have also set an aggressive goal of reducing our community emissions from 2007 levels by 90% by the year 2040, and we have made meaningful gains towards that goal. And we, today, the City of Orlando is walking the walk on climate and energy issues, and I'd like to highlight just a few. Today you sit in the best arena in the entire world, and that generally is because of the fan amenities and other attributes in the building. But most importantly to you today probably is this is a LEED certified gold building, and we are going through even more energy efficiency capital improvements even as we speak. Within 5 years, our Lynx buses, that's our regional transit authority, will be converted 100% to CNG and hybrids, and that will reduce our fuel costs by 50%. We've launched our first rail transit line. If you can believe it, we were one of 3 communities, 3 large metro communities that did not have any form of light or commuter rail. Sun Rail was operational on May the 1st of this year, and is already, in the first 3 months of operation, it's already exceeding the first year ridership estimates. And while we had free ridership for, I guess, about the first month, it exceeded it by about 400%. We're supposed to be having about 4,000. We are generating about 4,300 right now. But during the free operation, we had 11 or 12,000 every day, which was pretty impressive. We have large solar array installations already at Valencia College, Goodwill Central Florida, and IKEA. And with Harbor's Power and Disney, we're converting food waste into electricity. And I would like to see similar facilities to what Disney has done all around the city of Orlando. And we're excited to announce that Orlando has joined the U.S. Department of Energy Better Building Challenge, and we are leveraging $17 million in energy efficiency projects in 56 of our additional buildings that is expected to save more than $2.4 million a year in energy cost. And some of those improvements are right here at the Amway Center, as I mentioned. City Hall is getting a lot of efficiency. We're actually replacing all of the elevators. Surprising how much energy those old 25-year-old elevators use. We're doing parking lots, ball fields, swimming pools, and part of those cost savings are going to pay for about 50% of the capital cost of a new police station, a new OPD headquarters, which will be one of the most low-carbon buildings in all of Florida. These are examples that offer the foundation to ensure that Orlando's leadership in the Southeast is adequately addressing global climate changes. Now, we're ready to discuss next steps on how businesses and residents and the City of Orlando can all work together to build a better future. So over the next few years, we're going to pursue 5 initiatives Number one, we're going to increase our commitment to solar energy and support business and job creation that follow solar energy production. I see May Lynn, who was the chair of our OUC board right there, nodding her head. She's one of the true believers and movers and shakers in that area. We're going to explore waste solutions that produce energy and reduce our dependence on foreign oil and save tax money. We're going to increase our tree canopy. I know that if you flew in to OIA and looked down, you thought, wow, there's no buildings, it's all tree canopy. But our goal is to have a 40% tree cover to create some great shade and some great urban forest. We want to work on crafting energy efficiency and green building policy. And last, I'm going to ask my GreenWorks Advisory Committee to draft a green economy toolkit and action plan to ensure that the city and its partners are taking the best steps to produce climate and energy jobs. We continue this community conversation, and we're lucky, I think, to have put this together so quickly and to have such a fantastic group of experts here to help us understand how Orlando can better position itself. I want to personally thank our speakers who have traveled from all over the country today. Peter Lehner from the NRDC, Skip Leitner from the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy, May Lynn Dominguez, who is official with OUC and Program Director at Full Sail, Robbie Diamond with Securing America's Future Energy, Jim Fenton with UCS Florida Solar Energy Center, John Porter from Clean Footprint, and Mike Boots from the White House Council on Environmental Quality, who will be joining us shortly. I hope all of you today have an opportunity to find both challenges and opportunities that are applicable to your individual organization, and consider what your individual leadership role can be and your organization can be in playing a role to be helping Orlando be a leader in climate and energy. Now, without further ado, let's get started with the program. Let's see, I'm going to pick out somebody in green to introduce the first speaker. Okay, Susan Glickman, who is the Florida Director of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, is here in her clean green outfit to introduce our first speaker. Susan.
Mayor Dyer, thank you so much. It's inspiring to see what great things that you and the City of Orlando are doing with the GreenWorks Orlando and the GreenWorks Community Action Plan. And when change is required, leadership is everything. Warren Bennis, who's an author and a scholar known for his work in the field of leadership, he actually passed away last month. But he says leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. And Mayor Dyer, you are a great leader. I and everyone in the room are watching you translate your vision into reality, and for that we thank you. I am now privileged to introduce Peter Lehner. Peter is the dynamic and visionary leader of the Natural Resources Defense Council, and I personally have had the privilege of working with NRDC over the last decade. They are one of the nation's leading environmental advocacy organizations with over 1.5 million members and activists and over 500 staff people, all working towards the same goal of protecting our health and our families, our communities, jobs, and wild spaces. Peter guides NRDC's policy positions, the advocacy program, communications plans, development, administration. Get tired thinking about all that, don't you, Peter? He manages NRDC's 7 offices, as well as leading the Action Fund's political activities. And they are working every day to accelerate clean and efficient energy, transportation, and protecting our oceans, our homes, and our health from pollution. Peter has a special passion, which he works to foster the fundamental right for all people to have a voice in decisions that affect their environment. He works every day to break down that pattern of disproportionate environmental burdens that are often borne by people who face social and economic inequities. Peter and NRDC strive to create a new way of life for humankind where we can be sustained indefinitely and we're not spoiling or depleting the fragile resources that support all life on Earth. I am honored to introduce to you Peter Lehner.
Thank you, Susan. For those who don't know, Susan's known as Clean Energy Girl, and is from our point of view at NRDC, one person is as good as a big office because Susan is so good down here. Although I admit, given your introduction, I wasn't sure who you were talking about. It didn't seem like me. And thank you, Mayor Dyer, and really congratulations to you, to Commissioner Stewart, and your whole team of what you're doing down here. It's really important on the global scale that clean energy not be a New York, California type of issue. It is an issue for everybody, and you are really leading the way in the Southeast, and that is important not only in the U.S., but because what we do here is important around the world, it really does have global implications. So thank you very much for your leadership. The last time I was in Orlando, actually, I was giving a talk on green infrastructure to a bunch of floodplain managers, and I was trying to convince them that cities can do better to use natural systems like wetlands and natural buffer zones and streams to capture the rain and deal with runoff rather than just a lot of cement. It's cheaper, it's cleaner, it has a lot of ancillary benefits. It turns out, of course, that capturing that runoff is even more important now in light of the heavy rains and storms brought about by climate change. So it's sort of ironic, and perhaps there's a good omen here that I'm back here now talking about climate change and what we can do. I'm going to shut this, and I hope that doesn't, well, anyhow. I'm glad to be back here for this and have the opportunity to be with you. The groundwork that we lay, the cost-effective strategies, the innovative solutions, the smart business practices, all of which are bringing us to a cleaner, healthier, and more prosperous future. And I do mean it's important that this is a more prosperous future, because the kind of solutions that I'm talking about will save money for consumers, businesses, and can help spur the local economy. And if there's just one message that I want you to take home today, it's this. It's that clean energy and clean efficiency are good for the climate and they're good for our prosperity. Don't believe those who are trying to make it in either or and using scare tactics. So by now, many of you probably have actual personal stories about climate change. If you're from New York like me, a lot of it is often Hurricane Sandy. The flooded homes and the subways, the downed trees. We were without power in Manhattan for almost a week. I don't know if any of you saw the videos of the water flooding into the subways. I mean, it really was awesome, and not in a good way. But of course, here in Florida, you've had more than your fair share of hurricanes in recent years. I think it was just a few months ago that Governor Scott declared a state of emergency in, 26 counties after some thunderstorms dumped 2 feet of rain. Sorry. We get the snow, you get the rain, but 2 feet of rain in the Panhandle in just 24 hours. And extreme weather events like this are the hallmark of a warming climate. They're deadly and they're costly. In 2012 alone, extreme weather events cost the country more than $140 billion. And U.S. taxpayers, you and me, had to pick up $100 billion of that tab. And the Southeast, of course, has more billion-dollar weather disasters over the past few years than the rest of the country combined. So the bottom line is climate change is a problem we can't afford to ignore. You probably remember that maybe about a month ago, former Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson compared the climate crisis to the 2008 financial bubble. And he said, we've all seen what happened and felt the cost of ignoring the financial bubble. This one's going to be bigger. Let's not ignore the climate bubble. Well, the good news is, of course, that we're not ignoring the climate bubble. At least some people aren't ignoring it. And just as many of us have our personal stories of the impacts of climate change, we now have often our personal stories of our solutions to climate change. It may be that you walk or bike to work more often. It may be that you've changed your diet or how much you fly. I put new insulation in my home, and every day I can see that it's saving me money and keeping the house more comfortable. But what makes these personal stories interesting is that they're not just happening in a vacuum. We now have smart policies taking place in cities like New York City, where I'm from, and Orlando here. We have it in states as disparate as Massachusetts, North Carolina, Oregon, and Illinois, and now at the federal government as well. And the solutions that are being put in place, whether it be GreenWorks Orlando, or NRDC's City Energy Project, of which Orlando is a part, or national solutions like EPA's Clean Power Plan, All of these are going to save energy and money for cities, for businesses, and consumers. They're going to make our air cleaner, our climate safer, and our families healthier. So these are the groundworks for building our future. But of course, we're only going to do it if we all are working together. That is, us individually, as community groups, schools, business leaders, elected officials, agency officials, and everybody else. And it will take, as Susan said, leadership to get this done. Now, some people will say, of course, that fighting climate change is too expensive. And some people, not to get political, will say, well, they don't even know if it's real because they're not a scientist. To say the obvious, I'm not a doctor, but I listen to my doctor. When the plumber says something needs to happen, I listen to the plumber. And I listen to my lawyer, even though I'm a lawyer and I probably should know better. We listen to experts who know what they're talking about. Thousands of scientists all over the world who've been studying this issue for decades, and as well as the clear evidence before our very eyes, make clear that we better get cracking on solutions or we're going to be in a heap of trouble. There have been 3 major comprehensive studies in just the past few months, from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the National Climate Assessment. And here in Florida, your state has been declared a disaster area 19 times since 2000 due to damage from hurricanes, storm surges, heavy rains, and flooding. In 2011 alone, Florida experienced record-breaking heat in 20 counties and 34 broken heat records, record-breaking rain in 22 counties and 27 broken rainfall records, and extreme drought. The National Climate Assessment, which Mayor Dyer just mentioned, it estimates that more than $1 trillion worth of property could be inundated if sea levels rise just 2 feet. And half of that is right here in Florida. So in low-lying coastal areas like here, just a few inches of sea level rise will impair stormwater drainage systems, the things I was talking about when I was last in Orlando. And this means rainwater, even from a small shower, will flood streets and neighborhoods instead of flowing into the ocean. Rising seas also increase the risk of salt water intruding into freshwater supplies. Something I was thinking about as taking my shower this morning. You don't have, in California, whenever you travel there, they have extreme drought, so extreme water-saving devices on their showers. I can promise you, take care of your freshwater supply. You'll enjoy it in the morning. But across the southeast, we're also looking at more days of 95-degree weather. It was probably close to that when I landed last night, which is a real health risk in itself, especially for the elderly. And hot days, in addition, bring a rise in air pollution, allergens, and of course energy demand, as everyone tries to crank up their air conditioner to stay cool. And if that energy is coming from dirty power, as it often is, we're pumping more heat-trapping gas in the atmosphere as we're trying to cool down, making the whole thing even worse. Separate from NRDC, I actually manage a coffee farm in Costa Rica, and climate change is having a huge impact there. The cool mountains where coffee grows are getting warmer. Pests that used to be controlled by the weather more are expanding. Rainfall patterns on which agriculture is dependent are changing dramatically. So it's not just as a New Yorker, not just as an NRDC advocate, but actually as a farmer and as a small businessman, I can tell you it's not easy to adapt to climate change, to the actual changes of the world around us. It actually is easier to work to reduce those emissions and reduce the amount of climate change. So that's what we have to get going. Just a few weeks ago, the White House Council of Economic Advisors announced that delaying action on climate change for just 1 decade, or 10 years, will likely increase the cost of doing so by about 40%. The longer we delay fixing our homes, we know the ultimate cost is just more. The same is here. The longer we delay, the more it will cost, and the more dislocating the solutions. So action now is imperative, and the good news is we're to begin seeing action on a lot of fronts. On the federal level, a few years ago, we had major steps taken to improve the efficiency of our cars and trucks, and already we're seeing money saved and far less pollution. And this year, on June 2nd, EPA announced its first ever proposal to cut pollution from existing power plants, which are the largest source of global warming pollution in the country. This is the single most important step this country will take to combat climate change. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of this plan because it's a story about innovation, and it actually is a wonderful opportunity. It starts with innovation, it sets up a framework that spurs innovation, and as we know from history, innovation is a good thing for both our energy, our economy, and our environment. Now, we've known for decades that power plants are the biggest source of carbon pollution in the country. They produce about 40% of our carbon emissions, and right now there are no national limits on how much carbon a power plant can pump into the atmosphere. None. We have limits on almost all other types of pollution, but not carbon pollution. They have a free pass to pollute. But for years we were stymied on this issue. Congress was gridlocked, and the administration was focused on other priorities. But a number of us looked and realized there was a way forward. We knew that we didn't have to wait for Congress, that in fact the existing Clean Air Act, passed repeatedly and strengthened by Congress over the years, gave EPA ample authority. But there was a perception in Washington that the Clean Air Act was too expensive and wasn't going to be very effective. But the EPA approach proved this conventional wisdom wrong. It came up with an innovative strategy to cut power plant pollution. It was fair, it was flexible, and when they ran the numbers using the same analysts that utilities use, they found that it was going to be incredibly cost effective. Not only would the average consumer save on electric bills as a result of energy efficiency measures, but tens of billions of dollars of savings of health costs and weather disasters avoided would far outweigh the costs of implementation. What's more, implementing these standards would create more than 270,000 new efficiency-related jobs. In Florida alone, probably more than 10,000 jobs. And this includes jobs for electricians and roofers and carpenters and insulation workers, all these people on the ground right here because you can't outsource installing efficiency. Last summer, when President Obama announced this historic climate action plan, he directed EPA to cut carbon using this innovative approach. I was actually in the audience then, and I remember that the president's teleprompter actually broke down because it was too hot. So instead of looking at his teleprompter back and forth, he started being like the rest of us, looking at his speech on the podium. It was as if we couldn't wait to start dealing with climate change. So when EPA proposed its plan this June, the agency did as the president asked, suggesting this fair and flexible framework allowing each state to drive its own energy destiny while driving its whole carbon pollution down on a national scale. It's not a one-size-fits-all, it's allowing each state the flexibility it needs. The plan is built on the very simple recognition that America's energy sector works as a system. It's not just individual plants or one smokestack. It's many pieces working together. Every utility has often a number of power generating facilities, miles and miles of wires, tens or hundreds of thousands of customers. And if you look at it as a whole, you have a lot more opportunities to find reductions, rather than if you just look at a single power plant. So the plan allows states and utilities to meet their goals, whether through cleaner fuels, increased efficiency, or more renewable energy. Instead of being required to retrofit one plant, or perhaps even shut it down, a utility can shift generation from dirty plants to cleaner plants. They could expand energy efficiency or expand renewable energy, all of which reduces the average emissions from the system. So the end result of this would be a 26% reduction by 2020, a 30% reduction by 2030 compared by 2005 levels. And EPA estimates that the benefits for this will be between $50 and $90 billion for a cost of $7 to $9 billion. That's a 10-to-1 return on our investment. So what's really smart about this is it gets everybody involved, and that's what it's going to be taking to get us there, and particularly to take advantage of energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is the low-hanging fruit of carbon-cutting strategies. It's simply cutting waste. According to the firm McKinsey, the U.S. alone is sitting on a potential of $1.2 trillion in energy efficiency measures. There's opportunities to cut food, by the way, not only in electricity, cut waste, not only in electricity, but food waste, transportation waste, all these areas, and it's money just waiting to be taken for us. The one of the things that people don't realize, though, is that buildings account for about half of our energy. In cities, it's much more than that. In Orlando, I think buildings are about 75% of carbon emissions. New York City, it's about 80%. And at the same time, these buildings waste an enormous amount of energy. Many of them were built before modern energy codes were in place, and so energy is literally flying out the windows or leaking through cracks. But making buildings more efficient is as much a policy issue as it is a technical issue, perhaps even more so. And it's good that cities are taking the lead in making this energy efficiency work. With projects like Greenworks Orlando are empowering the cities to pick the low-hanging fruit and make the most of the cost of energy efficiency. You've heard a little bit, but I want to repeat it because it really is impressive what Orlando is doing. They will, in fact, be the leader in the Southeast. Using the Greenworks Orlando Sustainability Plan, as you heard, the city set goals of reducing your emissions by 25% by 2018 and 90%. I mean, no one else in the country is doing that by 2040. And with this relatively small investment, I think it was $1 million from the stimulus, you improved the energy efficiency of 28 municipal buildings and reduced energy bills by an average of 31% a year. And then you're pumping the savings back into an energy revolving fund, using it to fund even more energy efficiency programs. And so thanks to that, 110 more city facilities, including city swimming centers and even this building, I think, are getting energy efficiency upgrades. It's really quite impressive. So this energy efficiency work is being bolstered by your participation in NRDC's Clean Energy Plan, of which you were one of 10 cities selected out of a nationwide group of cities that applied to participate. And that project also focuses on improving energy efficiency in the city's largest buildings, which is important. The City Energy Project, NRDC City Energy Project, was born a bit the same way your Greenworks Orlando was built. The idea that we could use the stimulus money not once, but again and again if we reinvested those savings from the energy efficiency. And one of the key tools of the City Energy Project is energy benchmarking and disclosure. So managers and tenants can see how much energy their buildings use. As they say, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So we say, okay, let's measure it. And that is having a huge impact. City Energy Project experts will also be helping Orlando to develop energy financing instruments to offset upfront costs, which can sometimes stall energy efficiency investment. Even though long-term savings are indisputable, capital isn't always readily available for financing the projects that might be necessary. So among the 10 cities in the City Energy Project as a whole, we expect to cut as much climate pollution as taking off 1.5 million cars off the road every year. The project will save Orlando $55 million a year on energy bills, and across the 10 cities combined, it will be nearly $1 billion annually in energy costs. This is the type of thing that you can get with energy efficiency. It's a successful energy solution because it's a successful business practice. Whether it be buildings like the Empire State Building in New York or small offices in Philadelphia, all of these places are seeing 35% or more energy reductions, millions of dollars of energy savings, and paybacks that are very quick, 1, 2, 3, 5 years. We have one story I love. A simple law firm in a building in Philadelphia is saving almost $2 million on its electricity by doing energy efficiency upgrades. This is just one mid-sized law firm in one mid-sized building in one mid-sized city. Imagine if that is replicated around the country. And thanks to you guys here, we have the chance of doing that. Here's another great story that is nearby. A company called C2 Synergy, or 2G Synergy, which makes highly efficient combined heat and power systems for business and industry, is in St. Augustine. CHP systems, combined heat and power systems, generate electricity and use the thermal energy. And they're much more efficient than conventional power plants, which lose about half the energy in their waste heat. Now, we all know when we've seen battles over what to do with that waste heat. You build cooling towers, you dump it in the river. CHP says instead of fighting over what to do with this waste heat, why don't we use it productively? And so all of what used to be waste is now useful, and these systems are 90% rather than 40% efficient. The trouble is, most of them have to be custom made, and that becomes expensive and slow. So what 2G's figured out is how to develop a plug-and-play system that can be installed and ready to go in just a day or two. And that is a huge time saver, a huge money saver. They hired 50 people right off the bat, and as I understand, their plan calls for hiring another 100 or more in the next year. This is the type of thing that energy efficiency can do. It saves you, the consumer, money, it provides local jobs that can't be outsourced, and it's exciting. It's actually pretty cool stuff. So when the President announced his Climate Action Plan a year ago, it really was a breathtaking and groundbreaking moment. For the first time, an American president had presented a plan to tackle climate change. But in another sense, the announcement was just a logical extension of what was already happening here in Orlando, in New York City, in other states, and all around the country. In fact, 25% of the US population lives in states that are already limiting carbon pollution from power plants. That's right, a quarter of the country is already doing this. We have the know-how to solve this problem. We have the low-cost tools that can help us do it. The only thing that is standing in our way is the lethargy of the status quo and the entrenched special interests who are invested in that status quo and who are lobbying intensively, and often with misleading advertising, to roll back the current clean energy and efficiency efforts and keep us dependent on dirty energy. Well, we can change this, but we can do that only with your help. So every time any of you choose to take the bus or a ride share, when you choose to invest in energy efficiency in your home or your business, when you tell your elected officials that you expect action to combat climate change, congratulate them when they do it, demand of them when they don't. When you support EPA's Clean Action Plan at the state level or at the federal level, all of that are important measures that we'll take that are necessary for us to get there. And as we like to say, what happens in Orlando does not just stay in Orlando. The strategies and policies that you do here will make a difference, as I said, not only in the Southeast, not only throughout the US, but in fact globally, because you guys really do have a chance to set the stage and be a model. So it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
We have time for 2 questions. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Wait, give it again.
Hi, good morning. There was a comment that you made about financing the capital of businesses that were interested in going green. Could you elaborate on that quickly?
Sure. There are a lot of different ways. For example, in New York, one of the things we piloted and is now getting at scale, and the City Energy Project will try to get in place in others, is essentially a green bank. One of the interesting things we found is that energy efficiency, it's not a standard thing that banks know much about. So some bankers even told us that when somebody had an energy efficiency project, they didn't even know which division of the bank to assign it to. So encouraging and using, in this case in New York and in New York City, and this will be followed with the City Energy, sort of a little bit of boost to the banks, whether it be loan guarantees or others, and educating the private sector the private financial sector about energy efficiency, you end up creating a new stream of capital for this. And if you think about it, it's not a surprise. If you invest in a typical business, you have an income stream. With energy efficiency, you have the saving streams. And that's, for many people, a little harder to quantify, maybe not quite so reliable. So it's taken a lot of education as well as things like loan guarantees to get that financial stream up and running.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. I'm Clayton Farrar, Executive Director of Ideas for Us. The day after the EPA announced their Clean Power Plan, China announced that they would be seeking similar cutbacks to carbon. Are you hopeful of seeing other cities around the world also jump onto the bandwagon of utilizing this energy efficiency as well?
Very much so. NRDC has a pretty big office in Beijing, and we're also working in India and in Latin America. And in almost all of these places where we go, frankly, our calling card is energy efficiency. It's a great opening topic in a way because it saves them money, and that builds up our credibility. China has, frankly, a very inefficient system in terms of amount of pollution and energy per dollar of GDP, and they have great opportunities to increase the efficiency of their buildings as well as of their industry. Of course, the issue is a little different. In places like China and India, the estimate is roughly that 80% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 aren't yet built. So it's a new building issue. It's the opposite here. 80% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 in the US are already built. So here it's often more of a retrofit issue. So you've got the building opportunities and you've got industrial opportunities. And in both of those areas, we've been working with them. We've helped rewrite the building code in China on the energy sessions, and similarly in India. And to try to create the same as the first question asked, financing mechanisms, measuring mechanism, so that big industries can actually start quantifying their energy savings. But we have found in China, they have 5-year plans, and they have been reducing the carbon intensity of their economy very significantly in each of the recent 5-year plans. So if you overall, and of course given the size of the China economy, the reductions that they're making are enormous. And in China as well, it's not only happening at the national level, but you're seeing real leadership at the local level. Cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou are really stepping even ahead of their provincial or their national governments and setting the stage. So a lot of interest in it there. And the same is also true, I should say, in India, where again, local governments are often in the lead saying we can implement energy efficiency programs. We know this is going to have an immediate payback. It cleans our air, it saves money right away, and avoids the need to build new power plants, which in many of these countries is tough.
Thanks so much. Let's give Peter a hand.
Thank you, Peter, for that inspiring message. Now we have a very special guest who is not listed on your agenda, so for the price of your admission, you're getting a very special treat. He has continually been a great friend to the city of Orlando. He's been a fierce advocate for infrastructure improvements, for transit enhancements, for economic development projects, and probably the most important thing personally to me is he was instrumental in the city receiving a Tiger II grant in excess of $10 million, which is going to make horizontal infrastructure improvements to the Creative Village, which is a live, work, learn, play environment that is going to support our digital industry here in Orlando, a digital cluster. And the Creative Village is expected to be the largest LEED certified neighborhood development in the state of Florida, which I assume is appealing to everybody in this room. We're honored that we have the senior senator from the great state of Florida, Bill Nelson.
A lot of people, when they say the senior senator from Florida, they get tongue-tied. They say, it's now my privilege to introduce the senior citizen of Florida. In a world that seems to be blowing apart on this very day, we can come together and celebrate that Orlando is doing its part. It's like the little engine that says, I think I can, I think I can. The little incremental progress is what is going to ultimately make the difference, especially here in the U.S. Now, let me put this in the context of what is happening to the planet. It's called the greenhouse effect. And as we put more carbon dioxide and methane into the air, what happens outside of the atmosphere as those gases collect and as the sun's rays come in and reflect off of the earth, a normal earth, a lot of those rays reflect, bounce off the earth, and radiate back into space. what happens in the greenhouse effect is that when you put up these gases like CO2 in the upper atmosphere, it creates, like a greenhouse, a ceiling, so that as the sun's rays bounce off the earth, they're trapped in the Earth's atmosphere. And that causes the heating up of the Earth's atmosphere. Now, you know, the way that our media treats a lot of this issue, and I think that they are changing, because you can't be fair and balanced on whether or not climate change is a real phenomenon. And often that is presented in the media as if, well, here is one opinion, here is the other opinion, but in fact, it's 99.9% of the scientists that all agree that climate change is happening in front of our eyes, as balanced against 0.1% of the scientists that say it is not. So a couple of months ago, I took our Commerce Committee to Ground Zero, Miami Beach, for a Senate hearing. And in front, we had testimony from a NASA scientist who happened to be a former astronaut. And what he testified to was not forecast, not projections, but measurements over the last 50 years. In this case, in Ground Zero of Miami Beach, he told of the measurements of the sea level rise. In the case of the coast of southeast Florida, 5 to 8 inches over the last half century of sea level rise. It is so significant now at Ground Zero that at times of high tide, the streets of Miami Beach are flooding. And at the time of seasonal high tides, this October, they're expecting quite a bit. And therefore, a city like Miami Beach, unlike Orlando in the center of the state, is having to spend millions of dollars on infrastructure, on drainage systems, on their water systems. And interestingly, for the first time, we've seen the cooperation of the local governments in Southeast Florida, who have all come together, and instead of fighting over this grant or that grant, have come together and are supporting Miami Beach's applications for grants to meet this problem, and then they go to the next group and the next group. Now, before I exit this subject, let me just say that we hear a lot about flood control. And of course, ever since the 1920s and the big hurricane that drowned 2,000 people in and around Lake Okeechobee, there has been this effort of flood control. When the rains come, get the land dry by sending the water to tidewater. Since then, of course, we understand that that was a mistake, and you hear a lot about Everglades restoration and the replumbing and so forth. But what sea level rise does is, as the level of the sea comes up, the salt water starts to intrude. So in times of flood, when you really need to get the water off the land, now the sea is going up and you can't drain by gravity the floodwaters off the land. And so you've got to spend more money for more infrastructure and pumps and so forth and so on. Now, happily, thanks to the leadership of the mayor, and he is a great mayor, you all are doing something about this ahead of time, and as was said, you're taking efficiency in buildings of which 51% of your energy use in Orlando's buildings, 51% of the city's greenhouse gases come from the buildings. You go and start to retrofit. You start to put LEED certified. Then, in fact, we're going to have less carbon and we're going to save consumers money in the end result. Unfortunately, renewable energy has lacked something that we need. It lacks certainty in our tax code. And so what we're doing at the federal level is we're dealing with an archaic tax code that was designed to give the incentives to the oil industry, oil depletion allowance, all kinds of oil depreciation and exemptions, as well as deductions to give the incentive to go find more oil. And there seems this constant fight in Washington between those that are trying to do the renewable energy, while at the same time, obviously, we have to have enough oil as we transition our energy. And so we get up to where, for example, recently we tried twice to pass an energy efficiency bill to make mandatory some of the things that you all are doing here on a voluntary basis, and we can't get it passed. Or we try to change the tax code and give permanent tax credits and deductions for renewable energy, and we can't get it passed. And thus, you see the constant battle that we are having. This Senate Energy Efficiency Bill was to assist state and local governments with commercial building energy. And thankfully, what Mayor Dyer has just discussed in his remarks, the Department of Energy's Better Building Challenge is, through these grants that you all have received, is going to leverage public and private financing for commercial and industrial buildings to make them at least 20% more efficient. Now, I am a customer of Orlando Utilities Commission. As a matter of fact, whenever I go to dinner with Tommy Tart, the former general counsel of OUC, always says, I want to order some OUC water. That's what we have for dinner. Well, I want to congratulate OUC, especially Commissioner Malin Dominguez, on what you have done, and encourage you to keep up your important investments in conservation, especially at a time when we see other utilities that are not doing what you all are doing. This is one of the most singular, important things that we can be doing. And it doesn't grab the headlines every day. And that's why I said in my opening comments, in a world that seems to be blowing apart, and indeed there are some real challenges, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Ukraine, just to name a few. What you are doing is what the little engine that said, I think I can, I think I can. And the little engine did it. Thank you very much.
Senator, and how appropriate that the Sunrail train was going in the background as you were speaking, Senator. Thank you very much. So now I'd like to call on Chris Castro, who is the City of Orlando's Community Energy Manager, to introduce our next speaker. Chris.
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here, and thank you so much for the introduction. Today I have the pleasure of inviting and introducing our next guest speaker, John Skip-Leitner. John comes to us with more than 40 years of involvement in the environmental, energy, and economic policy arenas. He's a resource economist who leads a team of consultants at his own firm, the Economic and Human Dimensions Research Associates, based in Tucson, Arizona. He previously worked almost 10 years as a senior economist for technology policy with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. He left the federal service in June 2006 to focus his research on developing robust technology and behavioral characterizations of energy efficiency resources for use in energy and climate policy analysis and within economic policy models. Skip has authored more than 300 reports, journal articles, and book chapters, as well as collaborated with the best-selling author Jeremy Rifkin in writing The Third Industrial Revolution. His expertise includes benefit cost analysis, behavioral assessments, resource costs and constraints, and the net employment and macroeconomic impacts of energy and climate policy scenarios. In addition, Skip has been invited to provide technical seminars in diverse places around the world, including Australia, Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas, nearly every single continent. His clients have ranged from the United Nations and the Russian Presidential Academy of National Economy and Public Administration to San Diego County, the U.S. Department of Energy, and corresponding national labs. We are so excited and pleased to have Skip join us and to hear what he has to say about the opportunities presented by taking climate action here in Orlando. Without further ado, Skip Leitner.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here, and as you've just learned, unlike Mayor Dyer, Senator Nelson, I'm not a leader, I'm an economist. But hopefully, with an inquisitive mind, there still may be some things to share with you that may provide you some surprising insights and certainly some opportunities I think we can move ahead on. And as I'm thinking about this summit already, beginning to investigate some of the good works that's being done with the Greenworks Orlando, some of the excellent work of the city staff, Chris, John, Braden, and others, I've been quite intrigued the amount of learning and the amount of excitement is already beginning to emerge. I've learned, for example, just recently, every time I've landed Orlando, where the heck did the initials MCO come from? Well, I finally solved that mystery, McCoy Air Force Base, right? And I've learned similarly that Disney located its operations in Orlando in part to get away from hurricanes. It was sufficiently inland to prevent that exposure, but as we just learned from Peter, that may no longer be a viable operation. And I've learned that Floridians, and we'll talk about this in just a minute, Floridians are paying more for state-generated taxes, or excuse me, paying more for energy in the state of Florida. All the various ways we spend money on energy, transportation, utilities, heating our homes, powering our industries, more for energy than they are for state taxes. We worry so much about taxes. If we only put that same level of concern to work in energy, we might actually begin to think differently. And there are huge health effects that are typically not appreciated or evaluated. So many different elements I'm beginning to learn already just by talking to people here in Orlando and beginning to explore the good things you're already doing. And as I'm thinking about this thing we call energy, let me begin with this opening thought. Drawing from my work with friends in chemistry, you simply cannot trust atoms. They make up everything. And it's true, atoms do actually make up everything. They need a minimum amount of energy to retain the function and the form of the elements and the products that we need. If there's not enough energy to hold them together, they're going to easily dissipate, fly off, and become something entirely different that we may not want. On the other hand, too much energy, and especially wasted energy, they migrate into other things like heavy toxic metals, other forms of pollution. All of these things that impose huge costs. You can't trust them, but we darn well better understand them, and we don't. And I'm hopefully here today to begin digging a little deeper with you and how to think about my conversation. In fact, Mayor Dyer has already suggested a conversation is exactly the right word. So the beginning and the continuation of a conversation, dig a little deeper into a better understanding of what's really at work when we talk about the economic imperative of energy efficiency. In this case, as an economist, moving from a stressed to a more robust, vibrant, and more resilient Orlando economy. Well, with that backdrop, I want to get a little sense of the audience here today. How to appreciate what your perspective is. I'm going to shape my talk a little bit as we might imagine what you might understand. And so let me ask a couple of questions. I want to get a sense from all of you what your general awareness of energy technology perspectives might look like. I want you to raise your hand as I pose a few questions, give me some idea here. And depending on responses, I'll try to shape the balance of my talk accordingly. First, I think generally there is familiar knowledge, but raise your hand if you know that Louis Pasteur first gained fame by developing the technique to pasteurize milk. People familiar with that? Oh, good. All right. We have a seemingly educated audience here. And most of you are undoubtedly aware of Henry Ford, right? Raise your hand if you know that he's also the brilliant innovator behind the assembly line production. People know this? Ah, all right. And finally, next, raise your hand if you're aware, maybe you can believe easily, that dynamite contains more energy than a kilogram of food, say hamburgers or chocolate chip cookies. People? Okay. And finally, and not necessarily that you're going to like the prospect of more coal in our future, but raise your hand if you're generally aware that at current prices there are at least 200 years of coal reserves, if not more, that are available for development or use. People believe that? Okay. Now I'm going to ask you, how would you feel to learn that every time you raised your hand you were wrong? And that's the way we need to rethink this energy question. Well, let's start off. Pasteur actually in 1876 wrote a paper. You're going to smile when I say this, I think. Studies on fermentation, the diseases of beer, the causes and the means of preventing them. In fact, Louis Pasteur gained insights about germs and the way to prevent diseases within beer through pasteurization. Only then later did he apply that to milk. Okay. And similarly, Ford was a brilliant man. But his brilliance, his genius was actually to understand that in order to sell more cars, you had to bring the price of cars down. He adapted the assembly line ideas of Michael Owens, who was the innovator behind the bottling machine done a decade earlier, bottling for beer, I might add. Beer has been more important to our civilization than we imagined. Yes, yes. And it turns out that hamburger and cookies have more energy than dynamite per kilogram. But dynamite has the capacity to release that energy more quickly, and we sometimes confuse the two. A beer, I'm happy to say, actually has less energy than kilogram cookies. And yes, we have 200 years of coal, but not at current prices. Prices of coal, price of oil are going to go up dramatically if we even begin to imagine that we want to use these resources. And in order to understand that, we need to think about moving much more efficiently in order to really take advantage and maintain a robust economy. So in that sense, I'm going to draw on the spirit and the tradition of Nobel laureate and former Caltech physicist Richard Feynman. In 1959, he gave an incredible talk that has shaped my thinking about the physical, economic world we live in. 1959, plenty of room at the bottom. In 1959, before computers were common, he stepped back and said, I can imagine storing the entire Encyclopedia Britannica on the head of a pin. And it was that visionary stepping back and asking better questions that paved the way for many of the ideas we begin to see maturing now, whether nanotechnologies, whether microelectronics, what have you. I provided the website. I think these slides will be up there. It's an amazing talk, not a single equation in it. It's hugely literate. I recommend it because it's that kind of stepping back, re-examining what is really available and possible in the world that will allow us to move forward. So let me give you some further opening perspectives. The productivity benefits from my colleague Jeremy Rifkin calls the second industrial revolution technologies, for the most part those technologies that we now rely heavily on, those productivity benefits are diminishing. They're still there, but they're getting weaker and weaker and weaker. My own research and the evidence clearly suggests that among the biggest reasons for diminishing returns is the inefficient use of resources, water, materials, but especially the inefficient use of energy. I think you'll be surprised. A social economic transformation is clearly needed to sustain our economy, yes, to come to grips with the climate issue, absolutely, but we're going to have a weaker and weaker economy that will not have the financial resources to resolve and deal with the climate issues, or the education problem, or the healthcare problems, unless we have a robust economy. So a need for purposeful effort that includes directed actions, such as Greenworks Orlando, and targeted investments that drive efficiency upgrades big time. In short, energy efficiency can provide, I suggest, a critical link between today's lagging economy and tomorrow's more robust future, if we step back, ask questions, and if we exercise the leadership that allows us to take action. All of that efficiency comes through what we call the energy stresses that affect the dynamic of our economy. We have jobs, certainly, structure of the economy, energy costs, but those rising energy costs, the volatility of energy prices, the disruption in energy supply, migrate in different ways that weaken local jobs, weaken economic activity, and the productivity of the larger economy. And why is this the case? This next slide, I think, underscores it. These are a slide by two of my colleagues who are quick sketch artists. They are in Germany. I gave a talk last year in Zurich, and they did this sketch when I suggested that the U.S. economy, from a work standpoint, the ability to convert matter into useful goods and services from start to finish, is only 14% energy efficient. And imagine, as this stick figure is trying to do, carrying the 86% burden of waste. You cannot be agile, you cannot be productive, you cannot be nimble if you're burdened by that incredible amount of inefficiency. And that is one of the things that's stymieing our ability to move ahead more robustly. And to give you some comparisons, I've put together an index comparing the United States in 2009, its overall energy intensity. And the good news is Florida is better off than the U.S. as a whole. But if you look downward, beginning with Sweden, Hong Kong, Europe, down to New Jersey, and California, Luxembourg, and New York, and other states, way far to go. But the bad news is we need to be headed to a substantial reduction in overall intensity if we're going to imagine any kind of a robust economy whatsoever. That's the task ahead of us. Now here's some numbers I drew on. This is for the Orlando metropolitan area, greater Orlando area. And now what I'm looking at, interesting numbers here. I'm looking at the historical period, data if you will, 1970 up to about 2013 where the green line is, and then we're projecting forward, building in some work my colleagues at Woods and Poole do, projecting the Orlando economy. This is per capita GDP. I think that's a measure of the overall productivity of the economy. Early years, you can see the wild and woolly nature of the economy bouncing up. A lot of that's got to do with resources and the prices that affect the decisions made and the actions taken. But generally, you can see that we're starting up from a 4% down to a 3% and looking forward to maybe a 1% productivity growth. A slumping economy. That difference in the next 3 decades means that Orlando may lose the ability to create as many as 200,000 jobs on average. And what I'm suggesting is not unique to Orlando whatsoever. There is also a similar pattern within the U.S. and within the OECD nations, the developed nations, and even the developing nations of the world. A similar pattern because it is the inefficient use of resources, and especially energy, that constrains a much more robust economy. It imposes costs that we pay directly. We're not always aware of them, but it absolutely constrains the ability to move ahead the economy. And in that same regard, I want to offer that comparison of state-generated taxes to state energy expenditures. I need to update this, but 2011 data. And look at Florida. You pay about $33 billion a year for what the legislature approves as taxes in various forms, excise taxes, income taxes, the whole kit and caboodle. But for energy expenditures, for transportation, heating the home, powering industries, $68 billion. We ask hard questions. Are we taxing too much? Are we efficiently using tax dollars? If we would apply that same perspective, something even deeper, I think you begin to imagine there may be a greater economic opportunity than worrying as much as we do about taxes. Not that it's an unimportant issue, but a bigger issue for the well-being of Florida. But another take on it. Look at the number of jobs for the different sectors of the Orlando economy. These are Orlando data for 2010, the latest I could get. The larger Orlando metropolitan area. Utilities, energy services on average, directly and indirectly, for every $1 million spent on energy, about 5 jobs. Compare that to construction, where we get 17 jobs. The average manufacturing in the area, about 10.7 jobs. Trade and services, about 16 jobs. 10.9 jobs for household spending. In other words, as we can cost-effectively migrate the inefficient use of energy to a productive use of energy, reducing energy bills and allow those dollars to be spent on something different, we're beginning to bolster almost immediately the jobs. So in the spirit of Albert Einstein, he was known for what he called his Gedankenexperiment, thought experiments. I did this for Orlando. As an economist, I am simply laying out in such ways as Feynman might have done, asking better questions. Turns out that my estimates suggest that the larger Orlando area, again the metropolitan area, spends about $8 billion a year on energy. $8 billion, it's about 9% of your gross regional product. That's a lot of money. And I've asked the question, what if the city encouraged cost-effective efficiency investments to reduce those energy bills by 30%? That might save, obviously, simple math, $2.4 billion a year. But then taking those comparisons of spending money on things other than energy, redirecting those dollars to other places in the economy, we might imagine that combination of investment and the resulting energy bill savings might support, just from that alone, 13,000 jobs for local businesses and residences. I actually think it's going to be a lot bigger because the robustness of the economy will provide the need for other jobs to be supported. But even more critically, in many ways, that 30% reduction in energy might avoid $300 to $700 million in annual health care costs, including the prevention of 40 to 90 adult mortalities a year. In other words, we have cleaner air, it affects people in an easier way, we're avoiding those premature deaths. As part of the calculus, part of that larger context we need to explore. And here's actually, as an economist, yes, I have to throw you a couple of graphs here more, but I think in many ways, this is the most important slide of the talk, so forgive me. And I'm going to show you on the vertical axis here, energy expenditures. I last gave this talk in Europe, so I'm using euros, but it doesn't matter, it could be US dollars, it doesn't really matter. And then I'm saying, we now, at some point in time, spend what I call the cost of energy services. That includes the total cost of energy, but also the social, economic, environmental health costs. All of those costs as a result of using energy very inefficiently right now. Our job is to say, well, we actually need to spend more money on policy and program expenses. We need to spend more money on investment expenditures for tomorrow. It takes money to make money, does it not? So that we can bring those energy bill savings down so that we end up spending less than we might otherwise imagine. So the remaining costs of energy services tomorrow, not 2040, year after year, in order to maintain a viable economy so we can generate the resources to do something about climate, the combination of energy efficiency and new energy renewable resources must be able to reduce the real cost of energy services year after year after year in order to maintain anything like a robust economic activity. So let me jump to the end of the story. My colleagues at ACEEE, while I have my own firm, I am still a fellow with ACEEE, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. 2 years ago, put out a report, The Long-Term Energy Efficiency Potential, What the Evidence Suggests. We suggested that reducing energy use by 40 to 60% in the U.S. could be done through efficiency using highly cost-effective investments. Peter's talked about a number of them already. And could generate up to 2 million jobs nationwide while saving all residential and business consumers a net of $400 billion a year. Or if we thought of it as per capita household, the equivalent of $2,600 per household annually. Imagine the ability to spend that money on something besides energy. The really big insight, instead of tiny increments, yes, we have to start. But all the things we've talked about here today are the exception, not the rule. Leadership requires us to move these wonderful examples we talked about so they become the norm, the actual ongoing way of doing business. Instead of tiny increments, the U.S. is going to be better off thinking big about energy efficiency rather than relying on the usual set of more costly conventional resources. Might be like this particular slide of the iceberg. I'm asking the question, are we really living more by waste than ingenuity? And remember I said, right now, hard to see down there at the bottom, but we have an anemic 14% energy inefficiency, I would suggest. And because we're so used to that, and we're not used to stepping back, asking bigger and better questions, we tend to think of the efficiency potential as the top of the iceberg. But if we do, in fact, in the spirit of Richard Feynman, step back, we can imagine that the full potential efficiency is the equivalent of 250 billion barrels of oil equivalent in the United States through 2050. Now, how many billion barrels of efficiency for Florida? I've estimated about a 12-year energy supply at current levels of consumption. In other words, over the next 40 years, Florida has the efficiency potential to cut its energy use by at least a third and save money and have that investment driving a much more robust economy, many more jobs. So efficiency, quick order, I'm going to offer just 3 of so many examples if we're really willing to look and act on them. Traffic signals, one of my favorite. Turns out there are about 300,000 traffic signal systems in the United States throughout our country. Imagine how stop and start driving constrains and idling time wastes fuel on the highway. But also imagine retrofitting these systems with smart sensors and dynamic program so that these actually respond to actual traffic flow, so that traffic signals actually reflect the timing of where drivers want to go. And imagine cars that begin to talk to signals and begin to then help you modify your driving patterns so you become even more efficient. That alone could mean 5 to 10% savings on our fuel consumption on highways. Just something as simple as that. The cost? About $10 to $12 per household. The savings? Maybe as much as $150 per household per year, possibly more. One example of a different way of looking at efficiency. Or improving commercial buildings, a little bit dated, but still very timely. A 2000 Department of Energy sponsored study suggested that if all commercial buildings were rebuilt over time, applying a comprehensive package of energy efficiency technologies and practices, both technologies and practices, they could reduce typical energy use by 60%. And then imagine the widespread installation of rooftop photovoltaic power systems converting light into electricity could lead to an average 88% reduction in the conventional use of energy resources. Cost-effective technologies such as feedback and intelligent infrastructure can all be enablers of this kind of scale of success. Or developing what we call intelligent energy efficiency. It's not your father's energy efficiency anymore, but interconnected system, what my colleagues at ACEEE calls intelligent efficiency. Systems that talk to each other, systems that adjust and that alter dynamic flow of where people, resources need to be within building functions. We could reduce energy use by 1/4 of today's level while still maintaining jobs in a robust economy. Our colleagues using technologies and advanced sensors and controls, Schneider Electric, for example, Rockwell Automation, now offers services to manufacturing firms that reduce electricity use by up to 40% and reduce oil and gas requirements by up to 35%. Are others acting on these ideas? Well, consider the work I'm doing with my colleague Jeremy Rifkin in Nord-Pas-de-Calais. That's a former coal mining region, still heavy industry of 4 million people in northeastern France. Working with Jeremy and our partners in the Paris office of Accenture, we developed a master plan for what we call the third industrial revolution, and we suggested that region had the ability to cut total energy use by half by 2050. All remaining energy needs would then be provided by renewable energy resources, also by 2050. They did not shy away when I told them in order to implement this plan, they needed to be thinking about spending €6 billion a year, each year for the next 36 years. They did not back away. Instead, the Chamber of Commerce, an active participant in this plan, hired a financial manager to begin identifying where they get their first billion. They're acting on it. In other words, they're not backing away because it's a hard job. If my modeling is to be believed, we suggest that among this 4 million people, they can grow their jobs by 165,000 people a year. The master plan was formally delivered and accepted by both the Chamber of Commerce unanimously. In fact, the Chamber of Commerce has adopted as a strategic plan for that region in France, and the Regional Council, their functional equivalent of a state government, at the World Forum for Responsible Energy last October. And again, they did not back down. They're hiring people to get the job done. But what is perhaps our ultimate economic efficiency resource? I'm recalling the comment of early 20th century UK essayist Lionel Strachey, who remarked, and this is unfortunately still true, Americans guess because they're in too great a hurry to think. Or Jerry Hirschberg, who is the founder and former CEO of Nissan Design, who noted, creativity is not an escape from disciplined thinking, it is an escape with disciplined thinking. This picture beginning to emerge, and Henry Ford, who said, thinking is the hardest work there is, which is the probable reason why so few people actually engage in it. So with that closing, Maynard Keynes, in the foreword of his book, The General Theory, the difficulty lies not with the new ideas, but in escaping the old ones. So part of the task is how to help provide that leadership, that what is now the exception becomes the norm, to escape the old ideas and understand that both the climate and the economy are at risk because of the huge inefficient use of resources. Or as my artist colleagues suggest, the difficulty is to escape the old ideas by stepping back, asking better questions, and talking with one another so we can build up our mutual enthusiasm to act and take those leadership roles for the well-being of not only Orlando, but for the U.S. and the global economy more generally. With that, thank you very much.
We have time for 2 questions. Do we have any questions for Jim? Yes.
That was really terrific, bringing us into your thinking. So right now in Florida, we're in the midst of a proceeding at the Florida Public Service Commission where every 5 years we set conservation goals over a 10-year horizon. So my question is, would you come back to Florida and talk to our regulators, the Florida Public Service Commission, our big utilities, and even our governor, because currently the big utilities, which cover 75% of the state, are asking to reduce their conservation goals by 99%, 98%, 97%, 87%, so effectively to cut energy efficiency. So what would you say to them, since on defense of them, I went to all-girl Catholic school so I can argue either side of an issue, but in defense of them, our utility regulation incentivizes building power plants. So we have some real getting away from an old way of thinking. So what would you say to those policymakers?
A really good question. In fact, I've had the pleasure of talking with a number of utility executives, and there is one word beginning to emerge in the backrooms. They don't say this too publicly, but that word is disintermediation. It seems like a big word, but what they're really concerned about is the erosion of their customers away from their traditional power supply in a way that threatens their earnings. And I am now working actively with an investor-owned utility and another municipal utility to develop and apply what I call my energy stress test to the utility earning power. And what this idea is, I showed them in one case that a 10% loss of sales from existing customers might translate into a 50% loss in earnings. That scared the bejesus out of them. And there is increasingly a dynamic among those in the utility industry about this concern. They know the business model has to change. We need to move out of the sale of commodities, pulling a profit off of that kilowatt hour, into the value of services that are provided that allow their customers to become partners, become co-investors, collaborators, and pull a revenue stream off of services provided rather than the sale of electricity. It is an ongoing concern. I think you're going to see more and more shifting in that direction. But there needs to be dialogue, and rather than an adversarial proceeding, we absolutely need to engage in open discussion and forthright opportunities that benefit both the utility and the climate and the consumers. Now, when I've been seeing at OUC, I've been quite impressed by what I've been seeing here. That is something really to build on, and I think that kind of dynamic could expand. So the opportunities are huge. It's a question of whether we're willing to change our regulatory models and our business models to focus on services rather than necessarily the sale of commodities.
One more question.
You, on one of your slides, you had the dollar value for energy consumption in Florida, and it was $68 billion. I think it's above $70 billion now. Do you have a number for the amount of expenditure for fossil fuels? I mean, the bulk of our energy is, almost all of it is fossil fuel energy at this time. So it's 70 billion total, but some of that expense is for things like fixing the wires when the hurricanes knock them down. But the fossil fuel purchases, do you have a number on that?
I don't have a number, but professional judgment is probably on the order of at least 2/3, something in that order. It's huge. It's huge. In the U.S., We have a $1,300 billion, $1.3 trillion energy expenditure on the order of 2/3 fossil fuels. And the billion you talked about, Peter, that's only 0.07% of the nation's total energy bills. That's why we've got to take the very good work in the 10 cities and elevate it so that it becomes the norm rather than the exception. But fossil fuels on the order of about 2/3 of that, somewhere. I don't know the exact number, but it's huge. Changing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, if we could have our panelists come up. And just as they're coming up, good morning. My name is John Hippel. I'm the Sustainability Director for the City of Orlando. And I really appreciate you all coming out today. I think this has been a great series of speakers that we've had this far. So with us today, we have three, maybe four. Yes, four. We have four panelists. Another round of very exciting individuals here. And so with further ado, would you guys just kind of go down the row and explain or introduce yourselves and then how your work relates to the climate and energy discussions that we've been having today. We have two. John, why don't you start?
Okay. Dangerous thing giving me a microphone, I'll tell you. First of all, I'd like to thank the City of Orlando and, of course, Mayor Dyer for putting this all together for us. My name's John Porter, and I'm the CEO of Clean Footprint. And we are a solar development and finance company concentrating on what we call the middle market. And some of the things that I'd like to talk today to all of you about is not necessarily energy efficiency, because I think we've hit that. And John, I'm assuming this is sort of our 5-minute intro. Okay, very good. So I think each one of us has 5 minutes and then we get pulled off the stage. But I'd like to talk to you all about, because I know a lot of you are involved in government and sustainability programs, or maybe you're in businesses that care about the triple bottom line, which we call people, planet, and profit. And that's what our company is all about. But here's the big idea. I don't know if any of you have been watching I-4 out the window at all. But what I'd like to talk about is something that can really help the utilities hold on to their revenue streams and actually stay strong. And that would be switching our vehicles and, believe it or not, our lawn equipment, anything that uses gasoline. Okay, we can't clean up gasoline. There's nobody that's figured that one out. If we could, we'd be doing it, I'm sure. So the idea is for all of you in all your jobs and at home, using the power of the consumer, is to start changing how you fuel your vehicles and how you fuel even your lawn equipment. The idea is to put those dollars onto the grid, and it's at a huge discount. I drive a Chevy Volt, and when I'm driving my car on electricity, I'm spending about 20% of what you all are spending on gasoline. Let me say that again. I am spending about 20%, 20 cents on the dollar, compared to what you all are paying for your gasoline. So the idea is to get onto the grid as Florida, as the Orlando region, get everything on the grid, get off gasoline, get it on the grid. OUC is stronger that way. We can clean up the grid. We can't clean up gasoline, we can't stop the carbon emissions from gasoline, but we can clean up the grid. OUC has already proven to be a pioneer. They built some very good solar systems here locally. It is quite possible, and I'm going to tell you, we can power Florida on solar energy. Now, one thing that we'll need in order to do that is batteries. Energy storage. Energy storage should be something that we're studying as local government and trying to figure out the best ways to store energy. Because once we can store energy cheaply, solar energy becomes 24-hour-a-day energy. Folks, people will tell you that this is impossible, but it's not. it can be done, and we should be working on that. That's what Clean Footprint is all about. We want to change our economy over from fossil fuels to solar energy. Along with batteries, we can do it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mylene Dominguez, and I'm very excited to be here. My path is a little more circuitous, so I am excited, I guess, that I have 5 minutes, even though I didn't know we were going to have 5 minutes. So we'll be on the cuff here. So I studied literature and film at Yale, and I was living in New York City for a little bit, and then I went to LA, and I went to USC Film School, and I was in film production there. But while I was there, I had the great opportunity of seeing kind of all this energy efficiency that was going on, all these green buildings that were going on. And my mom is a local home builder here in Orlando, so I would call her and say, "Are you building greenhouses? Like, you need to put green roofs, you need to do this, you need to do that." She's like, "Honey, I don't know anything about that. If you want to do that, you got to move here and you have to help me do that." So suddenly I was like, well, wait, I'm a filmmaker, I'm in the film world, but I switched gears. I really felt that there was, it was about 11 years ago now, and I saw that there was this great opportunity here in Orlando, and like many of us that moved back to Orlando, it's we felt like, you know, this is such a spectacular, beautiful place with so much potential, and I know that's why you guys are all here, and that we're all committed to doing something. I kind of felt like, okay, what can I do, and how can I make a difference? So I got my building contractor's license, and I started building infill houses, and I built the 2007 New American Home, which was one of the greenest houses in downtown Orlando at the time. It was kind of right at the lead forefront, and got really involved in that and loved doing that, and then had the amazing opportunity of getting asked to be a commissioner on the OUC board. And of course, that experience has been extraordinary for me in many ways, not only getting more in-depth understanding of the utility business and what that means, and that it's a lot of really good people in the utility business that are trying to make a difference, that want to do what's right. And really what we face right now is, you know, to me, it's interesting coming from the film business, because we saw this happen in film also, this extreme switch to digital, and having to completely shift the mindset and to really be incredibly innovative in how it is that you look at, okay, there's other ways to make money, and there's people that either get on the bandwagon to make money in a new way or they don't. And so this is something that I've been really encouraging OUC, and I think that I see the leadership at OUC has been embracing, and everybody's kind of on board with, you know, understanding that renewables are important, that energy efficiency is critical, but at the same time that that we need to come up with a new model, as was mentioned before. We need to find a new way to create income, and that can be done, and it can be a win-win, and I'm a big believer in that, and I think that we can do that. Currently, right now, I run the Film Master's Program at Full Sail University, so I left the whole building business and went back to film. The fact that it coincided with the housing collapse, I have no idea what that's all about. But of course, I'm, you know, thrilled to be in education at the same time, and you know, people often ask me how this is in alignment. We just had all of our students are competing right now to get their films for this UN climate change. It's going to be in Paris in a year and a half or so, and so they are, you know, making movies about that. So there's a way that we can tell the story, because look, we're all here, you guys know a lot about this, and we can talk everyone to death and bore you to death. I'm a big believer in how can we make sure that we connect back to why we're doing this, what's important about this, why this is meaningful to us, and how can we share the story in a way that will really connect to people's, you know, to their hearts. Because ultimately, how can we tell stories, how can we be creative when we don't have beautiful nature to look at anymore, when we don't have something extraordinary that inspires us? How will this place be competitive going forward if it's so hot that nobody can come down here, or there's constant hurricanes? You know, this is an oasis, it's special. Not only do we have to go back and retrofit some of the old things, but we have all sorts of new things that are coming up that we have to think. You know, I just went to the restroom, it was all dark and the lights came on. I mean, it's constant things like this in our planning and what we can do to change, to make an extraordinary place that is innovative, that is dynamic, and that's inspiring. So.
Thank you, Malin. I have sort of a similar story, but I think my directions were in the exact opposite direction. I grew up in Southern California. It took me 25 years to move from one theme park to the other. I grew up in Orange County, California, did indeed work at Disneyland. I went to that better university in Los Angeles than the one you mentioned, okay? And then I chose to go to Connecticut as well, and I worked at the better university in the state of Connecticut than the one you went to as well for 20 years, and left that state down here because of the opportunity that is here in Florida. And so I run the Florida Solar Energy Center, which is a research institute of the University of Central Florida. We have about 80 professionals that work in energy-related activities, and you can imagine we were created actually by the Florida legislature, and Senator Bill Nelson had a lot to do with that back when he served in the legislature of the state of Florida at that time in our creation. And that was a solar beginning. Of course, when we thought we would put solar hot water heaters on their roof, and photovoltaic and solar electricity was just way too expensive. You never imagined that you'd be doing that. And so we had a bunch of tree huggers that worked at my place, and we easily branded it then in energy efficiency, and actually built buildings energy research efficiency, about 40 professionals that work actually on those activities, and we partner with ACEEE, get a reasonable amount of funding from the utilities as well, working on various things. And there are opportunities even in deep retrofits where you even shave off peaks from the utilities perspective. So there's examples where the utilities really win when you do some energy efficiency things. So we can find those win-win opportunities. And I think the exciting thing is I want to point out to us is that as we've moved past New York in population, supposedly that occurred in February of this year and became the third most populated state, I remind you that 19 million of you are all larger than all of New England together. So you saw those states of Massachusetts up there being energy efficient, you saw the New England states, you saw all that. Okay, yeah, I left there. Why? They're doing it. We have a lot of potential. Maybe it's a potential we haven't achieved yet, but we're working together with the team. And I think it's an exciting time. You've seen the efficiency activities that we've talked about and all the energy efficiency savings there. We've seen that the utilities in the state of Florida have led a lot of the Southeast. We are moving cleaner, okay, in a lot of progress with that. We're starting to see where the economics of large-scale utility solar can actually be the cheapest power plant around. I was shocked that I would tell you that, but that's the case right now. Okay, yes, we do need storage to provide the energy over the evening and some things like that. But lo and behold, we can get rid of all those internal combustion engine cars where we buy gasoline that doesn't come from Florida and use locally made electricity, maybe through energy efficiency taken out of your home. Typical energy efficient home cost savings, 30% energy efficiency savings. If you take all that money and buy electricity back from the utility with it, you've fueled your car for free. So your first automobile, once you've retrofitted your home, the fuel's paid for. The second one, yeah, maybe it's solar, utility, or whatever, but we could generate all the electricity to replace our transportation fuel, and it can be made here. The $68 billion that we talked over, the money that we spent on efficiency, unlike our tax dollars, the tax dollars are spent here in Florida. We argue about them a lot, but they're spent here. Okay? My real crime on that energy is, yes, it's a huge number, and all that money is shipped across our borders. I want to lower the expenditures on energy, because once you spend money on energy, it's gone. You can't get it back. Spend it on infrastructure, jobs, and creation. But I want it spent here. And I think collectively we can all win, okay, at focusing on finding ways to do things energy efficient, do the business we need to do, and keep the monies here. And that is a partnership of all.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Robbie Diamond, and I'm going to have to start by saying the greatest thrill about being here is that 18 months ago at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, I got to, I just coincidentally was on center court and I got to speak. And I got to do the famous line that said, "Good evening, Orlando." So today I get to say the other thing, thank you for having me back, Amway Center. It's my second appearance, I'm hoping for a third. So I'm the CEO and president of Securing America's Future Energy and the Electrification Coalition, and we're based in Washington, but we have projects around the country. And we have this great project in Orlando that I'm excited to talk about today. It's called Drive Electric Orlando. And in thinking about Orlando's greatest assets, and of course you do more than tourism, but tourism is really top of mind. And what it provides is the opportunity, as you heard before earlier about the Chevy Volt, is to get more electric vehicles into our system. And so the best way to sell an electric car is to actually have people try an electric car. And the best way to get them to try it is to rent it. Orlando has the largest rental car fleet in the world at 50,000 cars. They have over 4 million rental transactions, and people are driving generally about 20 miles. Another thing about Orlando is you already have 300 chargers in this area, and right now 32 of the major hotels have charging infrastructure more by the parks. And so our idea was to create a public-private partnership with the two cities, with Mayor Dyer, Mayor Jacobs, Visit Orlando, and a great team of partners in the theme parks and the hotels and the rental car companies, and get those 60 million Americans and others who come down here to try electric vehicles for the first time and to demonstrate that Orlando is on the cutting edge of our technology revolution. And it's not just about the local, but really about the national. There are about 3.5 million hybrids on the road today, and that's after 14 years. There's 250 million other cars. So, in essence, that hybrids, it's not a success nationally in some ways. I mean, it's great that there's that technology that exists, and yes, slowly it's going to be integrated into more of the car fleet. But if electric vehicles are like that, you know, we really will be letting a great opportunity that's now occurring go to waste. There are about 18 models on the road. At this point in the introduction of hybrid vehicles, there are only 3. And the 3 top sellers are outselling the Prius at this point in Prius's life, which is about 4 years in. So it's really exciting opportunity. If one looks at rental cars, Sixth Enterprise just put out a study that showed that 60% of people say that they have chosen a car based on some of their experiences with a rental car, and 70% said that they changed their image of cars based on actually renting a car. And in the millennials, that's even more exciting in that 50% of millennials are actually looking for a car to rent with technology that they've never seen before. So there is an opportunity here that is tremendous that can change the world. And I say that because there is no other place in the entire world like Orlando where this opportunity is in front of you. And it matters a great deal. You heard today several of these statistics, but it's very important from a global national scale. After power plants, emissions, 34% of emissions in the United States come from the transportation fleet. 92% of our transportation fuel is oil. So what we focus on at Securing America's Future Energy is the economic and national security risk of our oil dependence. And 92% of our transportation fleet requires oil, and there's no other alternative. So this is a huge national security threat. And that's from if you look just around the world, Senator Nelson mentioned it, Iraq, Iran, Ukraine, Venezuela, even Ebola in Nigeria, they're talking about problems that could happen to the oil industry. You scratch the surface and you look at our economic future, oil is at the center of it. Every recession in the history of the United States in modern times has been preceded by or happened concurrently with an oil price spike. And it matters even more locally because tourism is one of the first industries to be affected by oil price spikes. So between 2002 and 2012, American consumers, their price, what they spent on oil rose from $1,200 to $2,700. And what they don't do with that money is they don't take a trip. In fact, the Tourism Bureau shows that the highest inflation, 3 years running, in the last 3 years, gasoline has actually been the highest inflation in the tourism industry. So this matters locally. You have a local opportunity to change the world, and it matters to the entire world. And so we hope, working with all of you here, and with the great partners in the cities, at the theme parks, the rental car companies, the hotels, Visit Orlando, and John and everyone, we really hope that this can be the shot that's heard around the world and the revolution can begin here. So thank you very much.
we intend this to be an open dialogue, so feel free to elaborate on the questions that are posed to the specific panelists. So Jim, we've talked several times today already. Skip mentioned it, you mentioned it about keeping these dollars, these utility dollars here in the state. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? And then secondly, what role does solar play? There's a lot of perceptions about the intermittency of how solar is produced, the economics, that it's too costly. Can you just kind of talk about some of those macroeconomic issues as it affects solar specifically?
Well, for a long period of time, the state of Florida has enjoyed low energy prices, and our utilities deserve a lot of credit. Even though we had price fluctuations back in the 70s and the 60s and then through the 80s, they got as a whole very efficient transmission, operation of their power plants and some things like that. And so we enjoyed a period of time of relatively low energy prices. And that was the same sort of period of time. Unfortunately, citizens aren't familiar with the price of their electricity. Most of them don't know what the units are. But everybody knows the price of a gallon of gasoline. So if you can imagine, there was a period of time when we were all living with $1 a gallon. Okay, that same kind of thing was going on with electricity for that long period of time. And Florida, traditionally, as it does in gasoline as well, has low prices with that. And then, China and India started coming online, 1900s to 2000. Florida was advanced compared to a lot of the other states in the South and promoted more building codes and got more energy efficient with this. But electricity's always been cheap, okay? And so, from a lot of perspective, the idea was it wasn't broke, why fix it, okay? There's a reason why New Jersey has more solar on its roof residentially than Florida does. It's not because New Jersey has more sun. It's because the electricity out of the wall is already way too expensive in New Jersey. It was broke, they looked to alternatives, okay? I think we can learn from a lot of that. Renewable energy is always an alternative until it's cheaper. I think we're looking to the point, of course, where we've always said efficiency is more upfront and cheaper. It's a different business model if we are from a utility perspective, based on making a profit based on our capital investments. Efficiency goes against that. On the other hand, you as a consumer, okay, want to spend the least amount of money you possibly can on energy. So the opportunities to fix buildings now that the price has gone up is encouraged. We've looked at that. We're starting to look at the whole thing as a giant system together, recognizing that we do want to keep the resources here in the state of Florida, looking at new ways of doing transportation. So I'm very upbeat about the way we're working forward with this. The economics are such that now, 10 years ago, wind was too expensive, solar was too expensive. Now we've got a lot of cases where it's actually the cheapest alternative. All right, there isn't really truly a war on coal. It's not a political thing. It's not even an environmental thing. The reality is the price of coal has doubled in the last 10 years, and it's too expensive. Okay, so that's why I'm really upbeat about the future. Is that now I don't have to just hold my tree hugger image. I can talk about green, and what she's really wearing is $1,000 bills all pasted together in that outfit, okay? It's just a different way of thinking. There's money in this. Isn't it great to do the right thing for the environment and our future and make money at the same time?
Robbie, you approach us from a pretty unique perspective. Because on one hand, you guys are looking at the climate change issues and how the transportation infrastructure impacts that. But on the other hand, it is the energy independence. And so you have a lot of organizations that are backing your nonprofit that are Fortune 500 companies, generals, former military officials. And so can you elaborate a little bit more on kind of, maybe some of the folks here are really, their thing is not the climate change things, but maybe the energy security aspects resonates a little bit better. So what is that nexus, and kind of what are some of the other perspectives beyond just Orlando of why people are really motivated around this issue?
Right, so in fact, the climate change thing is not our thing at all. We actually do not get into that issue. It doesn't make us deniers, it doesn't make us supporters. It's good that all of our solutions actually are important for climate change. But really in 2004, when oil prices were really just under $30, but one could see trends going up where we're fighting two shooting wars, basically consummate cause is oil. You've got increasing demand from India and China that's growing rapidly. In fact, since then, China has added an entire Japan of oil use onto the marketplace, which explains some of these reasons we have these high prices. And one looks at the political playing field in Washington, where we started thinking about this issue, sort of a classic Washington problem of narrow interests engaged and the broader interests not engaged. And so you really have oil companies, car companies, and environmental groups clashing with each other, and they get into this whole tastes great, less filling type of argument between these two. And we wanted to sort of look at this differently. So we recruited CEOs of large companies that use a lot of energy and 4-star admirals and generals to speak to this economic and this national security issue. And our chairmen are Fred Smith, the CEO, founder of FedEx, and who burns 1.4 billion gallons of gasoline a year with 800 airplanes and 95,000 trucks. But he runs the clipper ships of the modern economy. He understands why this matters and why the economy goes into a tailspin when there's an oil price spike. And 4-star admirals and generals, starting with General P.X. Kelly, the 20th Commandant of the Marine Corps. He's since become our retired, but the 34th Commandant is General Jim Conway. And they've been fighting wars over oil for a long time. Now, that's because we in the United States have taken on that burden for ourselves. We've said to the world that we will secure these supply lanes because it is so important to the modern economy. Now, that being said, I think they're tired of every time there's a problem somewhere in the world and getting called, 911 call the U.S. military to do these things. And so they're just highly motivated for those reasons. I think if you look at the world today, we've seen all this production in the United States of new oil, and that's actually masked a much bigger problem. And it's a great revolution going on in the United States. It's driven a lot of our economic benefits lately. But the truth is that there's over 3 million barrels of oil off the market today in Libya, in Iran due to the sanctions, in Iraq. Just put this fact on the table. The world predicts that 60% of OPEC future production is going to come out of Iraq. Now, who wants to bet their entire future on that right now? That's a problem in the next 10 years. So this idea of the U.S. production has really been what I'd say filling in the potholes of a system that's highly broken due to global instability. And I think that that's what drives them. The last point I'll make is what's really important to people who do not care about the climate, or in fact maybe even deny climate change, this issue does matter to them. They care about national security, care about a strong, forceful America, that the next century of America is better than its last. And what really matters and resonates with them is that there's no free market when it comes to oil. And that's where you get into what the government should do. And the truth is that oil is a cartel on the other side called OPEC. Every 3 months they come out of a meeting and they tell us how much oil they've decided to put on or off the market based on what they think they want the price to be. That would be criminal in the United States. When you go to a conservative and they say, well, let the free market figure it out, what we point out is there is no free market. And that's where you begin to drive the conversation of what is a responsible role for government in order to solve this major problem. And I think that's really important for people to understand when they talk to people who might not be into this issue for green or the environment. Thanks.
Thank you. So Milan, you've explained your very diverse background, varying from home builder to filmmaker to OUC board member. And on the face, these are very different subjects and interest areas. But I think it's also very telling about the need for collaboration, especially when we're talking about attracting the creative class and building an economy around this emergent millennia generation. So can you better kind of elaborate on the role that energy can play in that new community, the new economy that we're trying to create here in Orlando?
Yes, absolutely. I'm very fortunate to work, like I said, at Full Sail University, which is incredibly cutting edge in everything that they're doing kind of from an education perspective. We have degrees from, that have to do with app creation and simulation and really like kind of looking towards what the future jobs are going to be. And the people that are attracted to come for those jobs and the next generation that's interested in those jobs, to them, this whole issue of whether there's, this is not a question. Like there's already, the next generation is 100% on board with everything that has been talked about already today. Like it's not an issue of is there global warming. It's there is global warming and we need to do something about it. And again, not to get political about it because I don't think it is political. It's simply a basis of I care about my world and my environment and I want to do something about it. And for us to be thinking about, okay, we're going to be a simulation, a hub here, an innovation hub here, we're going to have a digital community, a creative village, and to not be thinking that at the same time the people that are going to make that happen are going to want to live in a city that's living in the 1970s, that's not going to work. I mean, they will only come here and be a part of this if everything else is in alignment. If the buildings are energy efficient, if the venues are energy efficient, if the people, the culture is thinking about what we're doing. One of the things I didn't mention is the mayor's working on this project downtown Orlando, which is envisioning the next 10 years of Orlando, and I'm chairing the sustainability committee, and we're really trying to think that way. And one of the big things that's come up, both in the visioning that we're doing with OUC and with what's going on with the renewables and energy efficiency in OUC and with this project ETO is, all right, well, these are some attainable goals that we have going forward. And what I keep saying is if it seems attainable to us today, we're not reaching far enough. And to me, that's what the innovators are saying. This is what the degrees that we're coming up with, what the jobs that are happening are things that you guys can't even think about right now. I can't even think about right now. It's so far beyond us, and so we really, 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 really have to reach as far as what we want our streets to look like. What the communities coming together to make codes that work to make things more efficient. I know that everyone on the City of Orlando staff is working hard on that, and I have to just really quickly make a shout out for Braden and Chris and John and Elizabeth, because we are constantly visioning and having these conversations, and then there are people that are actually doing all of the work. And so I am so thankful to the work that you guys are doing, because when we kind of come at this from both sides, we can make things happen. And that to me is efficiency, and that to me is really, really, really important. So I'm excited that Orlando is on this path. I'm excited to see so many more creative and dynamic people coming. And again, I don't even think, kind of to your point about, there's 1,000 reasons why this is really important. But first and foremost, my 11-year-old, who's, by the way, I just read this whole article about how they're reaching towards 11-year-olds for internships in Silicon Valley, and someone's reached out to her for an internship because this is the generation that's thinking. This is not even a question for her. To her, when she sees someone put a piece of paper down, she literally, to them, she's like, "What are you doing? Oh my God!" I mean, she's horrified. It's that they have a joke. It's not it's not fossil fuels. It's fossil fools. And it's we need to really understand that it's not a matter of us honestly choosing to do it. We just have to do it now, because they're all coming up, they're ready, and to me that just sets the stage for really making this extraordinary community that's creative, innovative, sustainable, and that all comes together.
So John, you represent the fledgling solar development industry that, I think it's representative of what we could be here in the very near future. And so can you elaborate a little bit on what are some of the challenges that your industry faces right now, and what are some of the short-term opportunities as well?
Sure, John. First of all, we address the middle market, and there's other companies that address residential, and then other companies that do what we call utility scale solar, which Dr. Fenton was saying is some of the best pricing, of course, is on that mass-produced solar. And we need it all. Some of the challenges that we have here in Florida mainly is due to Tallahassee. I've been up there time and time again trying to see if we can change things in Tallahassee. But I see Buck here with FPL, and those guys don't want to let go. They're pounding many, many millions of dollars over the past decade into controlling politics. And it's very difficult for us. So I can't sell you energy today in Florida because of policy out of Tallahassee. I can't. My taxes on the equipment that we have here as personal tangible property taxes are incredibly high. About 40% of the cost of generating a kilowatt hour of energy in Florida, guess what goes to taxes? It doesn't work. It doesn't pencil out. It does pencil out, I think, in some cases for residential units. And we'll see some of that coming as the taxes were finally approved to not charge people extra taxes on their home solar equipment. So other things that we have here in Florida really, again, is the tax issue that we have to get rid of, which was defeated by one of my own representatives in Brevard County, killed it in his committee to get commercial property tax abatement. So in Florida, we're a little bit dead in the water because Tallahassee just believes one thing, that IOUs are the only way to go. The smart IOUs, I think, in the long run are going to figure out that the models have to change. And I've said this to some good friends in the investor-owned utilities. Your models are going to have to change. We're going to force it to happen. It's going to happen. And the question is, do you get out and lead? Do you get out and lead, which is not happening today, or do you sit around and try and hold on to your dollars that you're making? Now, our company, middle market type solar company, is basically doing our business out of state. Because after a few years of really working hard to make the numbers work in Florida, we couldn't. The deck is stacked against us. So we're in Massachusetts, we're in Washington, D.C., we're in California, where the economics are good, where the state government is really behind clean energy. The biggest gift that Orlando has is OUC, or the home utility controlled by the citizens of Central Florida. It is your biggest gift. Everybody in this room, you've got to understand what you've got is a real gem. Orlando Utility Commission is not about the investors. It's about the citizens here in Central Florida. And there are ways to make money and move forward. So my hat is off to you and the rest of the OUC group. You guys have the power to really set up an example to all of Florida, but also to the world. So thank you.
So we have time for one more question. I'll just throw it out to all of you. So, what opportunity, what would be the first tangible step that the city of Orlando could take in the next 18 months?
I think the story that we've heard today about the activities that are going on in Orlando, most of us here are just like preaching to the choir, so we get a lot of that. I think ways to share this story with other municipalities throughout the state, working together in ways, lessons learned and so forth. I think the excitement that you mentioned that you see in your students and your own children, it really is an exciting time. The people that are a lot younger than me, and there's a lot of them now, really are embracing this thing. I mean, this is our moonshot, if you will. Okay, and yes, we've got a sunshot program with DOE, but we've got an Energy Grand Challenge which comes to vehicles. We've got all these interesting challenges to go ahead. And we spend a lot of time pointing fingers. I think the younger generation is, I'm here to help, put me to work. Okay, and they're looking for that opportunity. So the excitement of the story that's going on in Orlando needs to be shared. And it's a story that I think can be very infectious.
Yeah, so my big suggestion would be to kind of continue doing, but even more aggressively, what's already happening, which is this working together, the collaboration, just making sure that OUC and the city and Orange County, the whole community is coming together to be a part of these conversations so that we're not making shifts in little silos, but to continue to just make sure that we're making the big changes, and then to get the message out there, like to come up with creative, funny, unique little videos and be able to send those out on Instagram, Twitter, whatever, like video, just get it out so that we can share those messages in a way that, again, is not like, oh God, recycling, oh, I can't take it anymore. You know what I mean? Just like in a way that's like, okay, this is what we're doing, and this is why it's make it entertaining in that way.
John, real quick, what I would suggest to Orlando Utility Commission is to incentivize electric vehicles with, say, a free charger for your home if you buy an electric vehicle. I mean, you got to look at this as like the natural gas industry incentivizes you getting hooked up to natural gas. They'll give you the stove, or in some cases, or the hot water heater that uses gas. We have to use the same power of OUC to incentivize electric vehicle charging stations at your home and at your office. And really, you almost want to hand them out like candy now to really seed the environment here to get things going. Because you'll get that long-term flow of cash coming back at OUC. So it really is a win-win.
So because the mayor's done so much and everyone's done so much, it's hard to say what we need them to do because they've been such great supporters. But I guess there's three quick things I would say. One is, you got to keep companies moving in the right direction, and they're big companies, and it's difficult. It's not important to their bottom line yet because consumers are not necessarily asking yet. And it's for us to, the mayor has a lot of sway at airports where a lot of these people want to have good positions. There's a whole variety of ways that just the moral authority and the position of the city can continue to drive these large companies that work here to continue to commit to this. And that's really important too. The federal government has offered a grant pretty much designed for this program. The idea is how do you get more renters into cars, and it's $2 million. We'll be applying for that with the city, with the state, and just working on that and making sure that the political forces are aligned to get that money from the federal government. And most of that money is actually for advertising and different things. So that's really interesting and a different type of way of thinking about that. And then finally, the city's fleet itself needs to begin to shift over, to other alternative vehicles. Certainly the bus fleet has turned to natural gas, which is great. Cars can continually turn over to both natural gas and electric, and look forward to the city setting an example for these for this program as well in that way. So just there's a lot to do, and look forward to continuing that partnership.
So we have time for 2 more questions. So, yes, well, let's get the mic.
Good morning, and thank you for this presentation. And I applaud what Orlando is doing on a number of things, especially the transportation. I do want to take the opportunity to clarify a couple of things that John said. One is the IOU record. I'll speak facts as opposed to accusations. The facts are, our electric bill today is lower than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were also using 40 million gallons of barrels of oil. Today, we use less than 1. Most of the energy today is coming from American sources, natural gas. And yes, we've been pushing hard to build a lot of solar in the state, and we'll eventually get there. We also own over $10 billion of wind and solar assets all over the country. Our electric fleet, all of our trucks and all of the fleet that our customers use, that all of our employees use, is either electric, hybrid, or biofuel. We've moved our whole fleet. So we are doing some really cool stuff in the state. We're going to get a lot more done. But by the same token, I want you to know 2 things. One is our costs today are lower. It's about 30% lower than the average utility cost in the state of Florida. And our reliability is higher than any utility. So part of the challenge for a utility is to always continue to maintain a balance of cost, reliability, and also moving forward. Now, I will tell you this, that the majority of new construction in the United States as far as power plants is all renewable energy. So that's where it's going to go. But at the same time, we have to maintain a balance of being able to provide our customers the best options possible. So thank you for letting me rebut.
Any questions? Yes, in the back row.
Just wanted to say all this can happen and should happen and will happen faster than most people think, and is already happening. I have 38-year-old PV panels on my roof. They put out electricity at about 2 cents a kilowatt hour, some of which I sell back to FPL, who then charges you more to sell it back to you so that they can pay their taxes. Not only are electric cars coming on extremely rapidly, But fully solar cars are indeed a possibility. We just have to build them utterly unlike the silly solar racers that are around now.
All right. Well, thank you very much, panelists. We now have a very... We appreciate you taking the time to be here today, and we have one last exciting speaker. Mike Boots is the acting chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and prior to him assuming his role as acting chair, Mike served as the chief of staff at CEQ. In this capacity, he helped coordinate the administration's work on the President's Climate Action Plan, the establishment of new monuments that permanently protect unique American sites, the development of the nation's first comprehensive national ocean policy, and the President's federal sustainability initiative to reduce energy use and pollution across the federal government, among all other environmental priorities. And just as a personal note, we really appreciate the collaborations that we continue to have in the administration, so we have made some tremendous gains with your assistance. So Mike has certainly had an impressive career, so we're lucky to have him here in Orlando to share his views of more from the federal national level. So with that, Mike Boots, please come up.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. It's always good to leave hot Washington, D.C. and come to hot places like Orlando in the middle of August. So anyway, thank you, John, for your personal comment as well about the partnership between us and the city of Orlando. You guys are doing great work down here, and I want to thank the mayor and the city for both hosting this today and getting all of you in a room together, but also for inviting me down to be a part of it. I was here to listen to some of the earlier conversation, and I should say, first of all, I caught the tail end of Senator Nelson's comments as well, and you all should feel like you have a really great voice in Washington working for you on these issues. He has been really useful as this debate has taken hold in Washington and has been looking out for Florida's interests, but really pushing the envelope on where we head next. So, but it's no surprise to me that some of the best conversations, like I was hearing in the last hour from the panel, are happening in cities, big and small, across this country, like Orlando. Whether, if you're a local leader, whether you're in government or in industry, whether you're in academia or the nonprofit community, you kind of don't have time for the tastes great, less filling debate that I think Robbie was talking about earlier that, is endless and frustrating in Washington about the source or the cause of all of this. The reality is, local leaders, you have to solve that problem now. You're seeing the impacts here, and I think the last few hours of discussion is really good evidence of a pragmatism to addressing those challenges that we need more of. And I will take a second just to applaud the mayor's work on the GreenWorks plan, which I think is exactly the kind of initiative that we've seen sprout up, mostly from mayors across this country, in the absence of some other leadership, to be able to really drive these outcomes at the local level. So I want to take a little bit of time today to both talk about the nature of the threat that we all face. You all talked a little bit about that already this morning, but then spend a little bit of time talking about the kinds of things we can be doing together to address that now and into the future. So let me start with what we know this threat to be and what the science is telling us. The science is pretty clear that the climate is changing, and the science is pretty clear that the climate is changing due to human activity. We also know that climate change is not something that's far off or that's a distant threat, right? It's something that is affecting our economy now, it's affecting our coasts, it's compromising our safety and our security, as we talked about in this last panel. It's too big for any one government to handle, and quite frankly, it's too complex for any single approach to try to tackle it. And so I think, as evidenced by these earlier conversations, we need folks from all sides kind of in on that discussion. As 100 or more scientists talked about just a few months ago, they released the most comprehensive assessment to date of the impacts to the United States of climate change. It's called the National Climate Assessment. And it's a super long scientific document, but if you boil it down, it is sort of the clearest signal and alarm bell that we could be ringing about the impacts that are happening across this country. And what it basically says is that the climate change impacts are happening right now in every region of this country, differently in each region, but they're happening in each region, and they're impacting key sectors of the economy today. And that obviously rings true for you here in Florida. You all are experiencing increased hurricane risk, you're experiencing more extreme heat, and of course your coasts and your coastal infrastructure are constantly threatened by sea level rise, which in turn has sort of grave implications for your booming tourism economy that is largely built around your coast. So the threats are real and they're here now, and I know I don't have to convince any of you here about the seriousness or the urgency of that risk. That's why you're here in this room today. But I do think it's worth spending just a few minutes to talk about how multifaceted that threat is. A lot of people are quick to frame this up as an environmental issue, and a few of the folks on the last panel were saying how actually, in their world, it's not an environmental issue at all, it's something else, and I think you all know that well. In many cases, it's a public health issue, right? So the rising temperatures that are brought on by climate change can worsen smog and soot and pollen levels that exacerbate illnesses, including asthma and others. Cities across Florida and some other parts of the country are experiencing a very big increase in the number of days over 95-degree temperatures, which has huge impacts for a whole series of illnesses, but has a really big threat for vulnerable populations, both the elderly, the young, and many of the economically disadvantaged. And so there's a very big public health challenge that we are trying to address as part of this climate change challenge. It's also a considerable economic challenge. Plain and simple, climate change costs a lot of money. Extreme weather in this country in the year 2012 cost about $110 billion. And the impacts of those disasters are crippling on local economies, on neighborhoods, on communities, on local businesses. And as you saw, I think you all saw a video this morning on the Risky Business Report. That is something that was put out earlier in the year, maybe not, I'm seeing some shaking of the heads. That's a report that was put out by a number of business executives from across the country that really chronicled the economic risks and the economic threats of climate change. And it was pretty simple in its conclusion as well, that the longer we wait, the greater those risks are. And that report echoed much of what was put out as well earlier in the month by a report from the White House Council of Economic Advisors, which essentially said that the longer we wait to tackle climate change, the greater those costs are going to be. So when we talk about those climate risks and economic costs, I mean, the downside is that those are not costs that are being borne by some big distant polluter. Those are costs that are happening by local businesses. They're happening with families, with taxpayers, with cities like Orlando and others across the country. And so it's safe to say that that threat poses a very real challenge economically to our public health, to our safety, and to our environment. And so we are going to need to tackle that from a bunch of different angles and from a bunch of different sectors. I said earlier that government can't tackle this alone, and that is true, but there are some things we can be doing as a federal government that hopefully helps move the ball forward. One thing we can do, if we get it right, is to spur some innovation, some of the innovation we were just talking about on the last panel, to change the way that we think about providing power and the way that we fuel and energize all of the work that is happening across our economy. We need businesses out there who are cutting new paths and finding new ways to make progress there. And we need local leaders like Mayor Dyer who are already confronting these challenges on the ground to come up with some of those new answers as well. We can set some broad goals. We can encourage folks on the ground to find creative ways to get to those objectives and those goals. And we can provide some level of regulatory certainty so that people are putting money and resources targeted at the places where they are most likely to have the greatest effect. But let me move away a little bit from the challenges of climate change and talk a little bit more about some of the work we can be doing together. About a year ago, the President put out his climate action plan. It's a three-pronged plan that is meant to reduce carbon pollution across this country, to prepare communities for the impacts of climate change that they can no longer avoid, and to lead on the international stage, because this is not just a domestic challenge, it is a very real international challenge. We've made some good progress on that and are seeing some very good dividends out of that investment of effort. One of the things that I'd like to talk a little bit about is the Clean Power Plan that was put out just recently from the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, we were talking, folks on the earlier panels were talking about the kind of contributions of carbon pollution and others from the variety of sectors across the country. And we have spent a lot of time, as have people in the private sector and the public sector at different levels of government, tackling some of these other primary sources, whether it's the transportation sector and the work we've done around fuel efficiency standards and other things like that, or whether it's buildings, both commercial, municipal, and industrial, and thinking about the efficiency and renewables that can be used to power those. When you get past those two, it's clear that the utility sector makes up about 40% of our yearly carbon emissions. And so that was a very natural place for us to direct our next level of attention. And so what we're doing, what EPA is proposing through this Clean Power Plan, is to come up with some common sense standards that are the first time ever that the US government has set limits for carbon pollution, and give states the flexibility they need to meet those standards, to give them a chance to look at the current mix that they have of power sources, and to find ways that get them to a cleaner energy future on the path that makes the most sense for them. So for some people that might mean shifting to renewables. For some people that might mean investing in ways to modernize their existing aging fleets. For some it might mean setting up a new market-based program in their state, or for others it might mean collaborating with nearby states on cross-state programs that already exist. For many, in fact, for most, it will be a combination of all of those things. And EPA's plan gives them flexibility to do that. And so what we'll start to see as that gets implemented are some big changes that we quite frankly right now can't anticipate and don't exactly know where that will lead, particularly as some of the new technologies that have been talked about here kind of take hold and provide some new possibilities. But our view is that by setting some clear targets for carbon pollution, we are setting a signal that, that we are serious about this, and that a variety of sectors, including the utility sector, will need to take real action in getting there. So all kinds of stakeholders can be clear that there is, in fact, a market for low-carbon, clean energy future in the world and in the future, and that we're doing our best to build the right conditions so that the market can innovate to get there. Once those standards are in place, I think what we're going to start to see are some real important benefits. So I want to just take a second to highlight a few numbers that are kind of embedded in that Clean Power Plan, because I think they're important takeaways. The first is 30%. That's how much we expect carbon emissions to be reduced from the power sector by 2030 compared to the levels of that pollution in 2005. And so 30% is a big number, given where we are in the way that we power ourselves around this country. The next number is 8%, and that's the number that we expect electricity prices to be reduced through this plan, both because of great increases in energy efficiency that will be spurred by this, but also by reducing demand in the electricity systems to meet some of those standards that EPA is proposing. The next number is 93 billion, which is a very, very big number, and that's how much the public health and climate benefits we expect to see could be worth each year by 2030. Each year, 93 billion, which dwarfs, frankly, the costs that are expected from this proposal, which are roughly a little bit less than $9 billion. And then there are a few others. There are avoided asthma attacks of about 150,000 a year, 6,500 premature deaths, and then there's the tens of thousands of jobs that we expect will be created in the clean energy industry and elsewhere as this really kicks into gear. So we are taking some important steps to cut carbon pollution, steps that will have a real impact. But as we do that, as we take those steps, and as you take those steps, it's important that the federal government does its part as well. And so we recently announced that we had cut our greenhouse gas emissions by 17% since 2008, which is the equivalent of taking about 1.8 million cars permanently off the road. And that success is helping us meet some really clear benchmarks that the President laid out in an executive order back in 2009 on a whole variety of sustainability fronts, energy, water, facilities, and a whole variety. And so we're working hard to ensure that the federal government can lead by example, but we really are going to need to have everybody involved in order to help make that happen. And so together with all that work to reduce carbon pollution, I am spending a lot of my time focused on making our future a more resilient one as well. And that's because carbon has been building up in our atmosphere for decades, and it will continue to do so even with the reductions we're talking about. And so as that happens, we're going to need to make sure that we're continuing to make sure that we're prepared and more resilient for those impacts as they come on board. And that's going to manifest itself in different ways in different localities around the country. So we've been working with local leaders to try to make sure that we as the federal government can be the best partner that we can be as they're taking steps to prepare themselves for those impacts. The President knows very clearly that the best ideas on that front are not ones that are going to come out of Washington, D.C. They are not from inside the Beltway, but they're happening in places like Orlando and other cities. And so he charged a group of governors and mayors and county officials and tribal leaders that are part of his task force on climate resilience and preparedness to come back with recommendations on things we could be doing at the federal level to modernize grant and loan programs or remove barriers to resilient investments. He basically laid out a charge to them to say, tell us where we can provide better incentives to get these kinds of results that we're talking about. And on the flip side, tell us places where the federal government can get out of the way. If there are good examples of smart tactics happening at the state and local and tribal level, but you need us to move away so that those can kind of take hold, let us know. Those recommendations are going to be finalized sometime later this fall, but we've already started to take some action based on the recommendations we've been hearing over the last year. And so at the last task force meeting in July, the President came to that meeting and announced a series of near-term steps to help address the resilience and preparedness objectives of these folks. One of those was a $1 billion fund and competition to try to help communities have the tools they need to make themselves more resilient. And that is going to be a fund that's offered to communities who have suffered some major natural disaster in recent years, and those communities who are willing to invest in rebuilding smarter and stronger and safer so that they're anticipating that next storm rather than thinking about building for the past. Another thing we've heard consistently from this set of local leaders is that they need data. They need more, not more data, actually most of them tell us there's a flood of data coming at them. What they need is data that's consumable, that's usable, that's at a level of granularity that actually can help them and folks across their jurisdictions make decisions, make better decisions for things like infrastructure projects or building codes, thinking about where their utility can site that next power station or transmission line, or where they should be planning their evacuation routes, or where they should be building that road so that it incorporates the projections for sea level rise. So we've been investing more than ever in 3D mapping that can be used in areas like flood risk management and water resource planning, and working hard to get that out to local leaders who can use it. And back in March, we launched something called the Climate Data Initiative, which was an attempt to really do two things, both tap into the amazing capacity of the private sector and the innovation that's happening around data there, with the vast amounts of public data that are that the federal government collects, whether that's NASA or NOAA or the Department of Defense or others. This Climate Data Initiative was meant to unlock those vast sources of data, put that in the hands of tech innovators and entrepreneurs and researchers and others so that they can go and create the tools and services and businesses and applications that people have really been hungry for. And so we have launched a series of partnerships with a set of commitments from private companies around sea level rise and coastal resilience, and another series of commitments, both domestically and internationally, around food security and agriculture, and we hope to do more of that over the upcoming months. So the bottom line is that we are transitioning. We're transitioning to a clean energy economy. We're transitioning to a more resilient country. And we are frankly done, in the places that I work, listening to the tired old argument that we have to choose. We have to choose between a healthy economy and addressing climate change, or we have to choose to protect our economy. The truth is, we have proven over a number of years that you can do both. We are doing both, and we're already on our way to being able to pay those dividends in huge ways. Here in Orlando, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Mayor Dyer's Green Works program has set clear, ambitious but achievable goals, and by really investing in renewable energy and energy efficiency and driving that at the local level, you are making great progress towards the really ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals that he set. The climate change challenge, as I said, is going to need an all-hands-on-deck approach. And so we're going to need all of you, whether you represent a utility, whether you represent a local government, whether you represent a university or a nonprofit or anyone else. We need your help in better understanding the science and the data to map this ever-changing threat that we all face. Whether you're a private sector business here in this Central Florida area or you're from somewhere else, we need your help, your innovation, your ability to put capital into new solutions and innovate the way we lead towards a clean energy economy, as this last panel talked about. And here in the local government setting, we need people, we need more people like Mayor Dyer, who look at this as an opportunity and not as a bunch of risk and threat, but as something that can be capitalized to really build the economic growth of this region. And so right now, one other thing that we really need from you all is feedback. We need feedback on our clean power plan that I talked about. This is something that EPA put out in June. It's out for public comment for a few more months, but we need you to take a hard look and let us know what you think. If you work at all in this, in the power sector, with the power sector, we need you to be talking to your state and local leaders about the options that exist, the flexibilities that are provided in that plan, and we need you to be thinking with them about what those options allow, what they provide, and what the business case is for reducing that carbon pollution. There is a very strong business case to be made, but we need all of you to be making that case at the local level. The President has made very, very clear that we have a moral obligation to make sure that we do not leave a planet that's polluted and damaged. Our kids deserve better than that. Their kids deserve better than that. And so I'm here partly today to recommit our partnership in trying to fulfill that obligation and hoping that all of you can join us in that. And to close, I just want to say thank you again to the mayor, to the city, both for your amazing leadership on this front, but also for hosting this session today and bringing together the mix of people that are here. For all of you that are in the room, I want to thank you particularly for your commitment and your leadership to this, but also your pragmatism and your creativity. We have got to get past the debate that happens in the city that I live in and get more towards the place where we're having the constructive back and forth that I've heard in the last few hours if we're going to solve this problem at the very local level. The President said at the last meeting of his local leaders task force that you have a partnership and a partner in this administration. And so we are going to need all of you to be partners and have that two-way street working well over the next several years. But I thank you for your leadership and thanks for having me here today.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.